Here.
We're at Victory 23 here in Lafayette, Louisiana. With me is Louisiana State Representative Mark Wright. Thank you so much for being on there. I really appreciate it, Representative.
Glad to do it, Willie.
Well, I tell you what, you just got reelected without opposition. Is that correct?
That is correct. We had two unexpected people that qualified, like in the last hour of qualifying. And by Monday, thank God, both of them decided to get out. So it was pleasant. To win that way.
I've got two opinions when it comes to elections. I like it when there's a lot of people in the election because it gives the people a lot of new information and makes the candidates work a lot harder. But I also like it in your case when a good representative gets to get in without having the campaign because it doesn't waste people's time and signs and money and all that other good stuff. So it's kind of a unique opinion, I know. But
No. I totally understand that. It's kind of funny. My wife will tell you she always thought every incumbent should have an opponent. There should always be a contested election before we won. And then after you go through the campaign, like as a family and the things that are involved with it, she's like, now I'm kind of like when there's a term limited person and they haven't done something egregious, like just let them serve their term, and I guess that's how we started to feel. I won the first election, then we had an opponent who was a Democrat, but my district is like 20% Democrat, so that's not going to happen.
Right.
It obviously, conceivably, something could happen, but it's not going to happen in the district. And so the same thing happened this time. We had a Democrat and we had a Republican. Republicans kind of an also-ran, always running, but he ended up hopefully seeing the light. And the Democrat, ironically, was a guy who ran against Steve Scalise for Congress in 2008. And I think he spent about $2 million trying to beat Steve, and he got beat pretty well,
right?
Quite frankly. But so it was going to be an interesting race if we moved forward. But I'm grateful they let me serve my last term without a big campaign.
I love this. Well, speaking of elections, we got a lot of elections here in Louisiana this year. We want to have some commentary. I know you had some ideas and some thoughts on that about the elections here coming up, all the statewide positions.
Absolutely. No, there's a lot of good candidates up and down the ballot in different races, but obviously governor is the big deal, right? So, Jeff Landry, our Attorney General right now, is leading in the polls, and, we'll see what happens. But, when you've got that kind of lead walking into a primary, it's pretty difficult to beat. And certainly as a Republican, conservative Republican in the legislature, I'd love to have him as governor because the policy we'd be able to do would be amazing. Like we wouldn't have, but certainly there's other governor's candidates that, Sharon Hewitt, John Schroeder, my seatmate Richard Nelson, Stephen Wagaspack. All of them would be an improvement as far as I'm concerned, and happy to work with them if they won. But it'll be a nice time. And then you look at some of those other races. Secretary of State is a very interesting choice. You've got the Speaker of the House, my colleague Clay Schechtschneider, but there's a few other people in that thing that race that I think could certainly do a good job, and really good people. And I think Nancy Landry, I used to serve with her. I think she's awesome.
The good thing about having so many people, going back to what we said at the beginning, in the race is that it's almost like forged with fire. I think when there's that many people in the race, the competition makes everybody a little bit stronger, and hopefully, come out of the gate, after that, whoever that is that wins, and be able to do a great job while they're in office. Speaking of being in office, though, like you've been here, there's a lot of talk about how the last session ended.
Yeah.
How would you have liked to have seen that happen, that scenario happen more effectively?
So I was in the legislature the last 2 years of last term when John Alera was Senate President, Taylor Byra was House Speaker. And in both of those years, and I was told this was the case on a regular basis, we were jammed with the budget on the House side the last few hours, right? So kind of got used to that, right? And it was a tactic. There is some potential when you're going through these sessions to not have enough time to do things in the way you'd like to. But what happened was Speaker Schechtschneider and President Cortez, starting this term, Actually, we had put together some rules asking for budgets, 48 hours, 72 hours before, and they did follow through on that. This situation was different. It was the first time in, 4 years that we had that. Certainly didn't like the way it ended. I will say there is one little bit of information that I think is important to remember, which is in an election year, to pass a budget, you need basically 3/4 to pass it. So like if outside in a special session, right? So if we didn't pass it by a majority like we did this session, we would have gone into a special. And the truth is, if you do math, right, if you need 3/4, the minority rules, right? So you'd have Democrats and a Democratic governor basically calling the shots. And so ultimately, I think in a number of people's minds, it was, this is the best I'm going to get. We got to do it now and not go forward. Here's the other thing about it is, everybody knew what was in the budget. I mean, outside some of the things on the margin, some of the projects and stuff that kind of got inserted in there at the last minute, like the big picture stuff, I mean, we knew from it came through the House, went to the Senate, they passed it. Now, they waited a long time, and you certainly would have liked that a lot earlier. But, you had a pretty big, good picture of what it was going to look like. It was just some of these things that you weren't sure about, some of the projects, right? But so here's my answer to your question. Absolutely. 48, 72 hours before we got to vote on it, we got to be able to look through and see things. Nobody was able to do that. There were some procedural challenges. I mean, I voted to support the challenges. It didn't work out. So at the end of the day, that's not how we want to do things, but it is important to remember, like, that was kind of normal course of action for years. And in this term, it has changed a good bit. So next term, as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't happen,
So, and the other thing I think is important to note is that the budget that got passed, whether people like how it got passed or not, whether they agree or disagree, who stood up, who didn't stand up, the reality is most of it is a one-time construction expenses or project expenses that are going to be done to help improve Louisiana, projects that need to be done, and now there's the money to do it. The question was whether we're going to spend it now or save it for later.
Absolutely. So the House's original budget was designed to take what was close to $2 billion over 2 years and pay off some debts related to retirement. And what that would have done was freed us up with some slack or cushion from revenue in the future. I think it was smart. I liked it. I voted for it. But at the end of the day, the Senate didn't agree with it. So when it came back over, basically, they had originally, the Senate, the proponents of the initial idea wanted to spend all $2 billion, right? I'd like to believe, because of the work the Conservative Caucus did and that budget that we passed out of the House, it brought it a little more like halfway, honestly. Like, we put a lot of money in the debt, and some people have said it's the largest debt payment in the state of Louisiana history, which I probably is true. We've got, DOTD claims we've got $15 to $18 billion backlog in transportation funding. There's a lot of this water sector stuff that needs to be addressed around the state. And then we had some other, like coastal restoration, that kind of stuff. So my whole point is, the pet project part is less than 1% of the budget. There's things in there, I don't like, a lot of people don't like, but there's a lot of things in there that really, not a bad idea, and it helps. You got to remember, revenue or resources in a parish like St. Tammany versus a parish like, Union or Caldwell or whatever, you pick the rural parish that you're thinking about, it's very different, And
they're going to get a bridge that they've been needing for a long time, or a road, or repaired, or
absolutely, absolutely. And look, at the end of the day, I don't think this is the kind of normal course you want, where you're funding stuff at the local level or paying for things that need to be done. Obviously, if it's a state highway, a state bridge, we're doing that right now. But I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at what we had, people forget, we're sitting on $4 billion of savings, right? A savings account of $4 billion over two different accounts, right? So we're sitting on a lot of money to cover things, when we have a deficit or a rainy day and stuff like that. So, one of the senators who's involved with the budget process, what he told me was like, how much money we want to sit on and not use it to pay for things that we've already voted on to
fund.
Yeah, to fund. So, I get why some people would vote against it. At the end of the day, I was against some of the things that were going on along that process, but at some point it became apparent we wouldn't stop this. It was going to pass because enough people had said, no, I'm not going along with it. Then the question is, do I vote for it or against it? If you vote for it, then any money dedicated to your parish stays and gets used. If you don't, it's gone. And I don't like that at all, honestly.
I don't like those tactics myself either.
No, but it's a reality. So you're kind of sitting there like, okay, I'm the rep for my area. I got to start thinking about, do I want to lose that? For example, St. Tammany's got so much transportation infrastructure. So that's kind of the things that go through the mind and went on. And we'll see.
I like that what you've done here is you've done a really good job at explaining the other side. Whether people agree with it or disagree with it, we ultimately have to recognize there's other parts of the story. And if we're truly going to move Louisiana forward, we can't always stick to narratives and ideologies. We have to know all the facts and be able to talk about them and put them all on the table in a positive way that brings Louisiana forward.
Absolutely.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is now with this extra spending that's coming along, is that going to be a sign of a growth in government? Because I believe that one of the things that's robbing our country of freedoms and liberties is bureaucracy growing in D.C. And I don't want to see it happening in Louisiana. Is that going to happen with this spending in Louisiana?
No, I don't think so much. The recurring, the increase of recurring spending was something along the lines of 3 to 5%. So, and most of that is like cost of inflation, that type of things that go with it. And of course, we had a lot of inflation. People forget it's a $50 billion budget, but like only $12 billion is state general fund. Everything else we're passing through federal entitlements like Medicaid, food stamps, whatever the case may be. So it grows, but that money, it's more of an administrative. Like there's some things we can change or stop. Like for example, when Governor Edwards came in, he immediately went along with that Obama care plan I don't know all the details of it, but basically we committed to another 10% towards those payments, and individuals got more, hospitals got more. I wish we hadn't done that, but we're 8 years down the road, it's been done, and so right now with the chips on the table, right, this current legislature and current governor, it's not going to change. But those are entitlements that flow.
And this is another point that I like to make is, this is how the federal government erodes that 10th Amendment that allows our states to prosper and be independent and do what they want. The federal government injects all this cash into the states, and they put little strings attached with it, and that's how the federal government and the president and whoever's in office gets to be able to have their input on the states. Is through that federal money, and that
Absolutely.
Overrides our 10th Amendment. What do you think about that?
No, that's exactly right. And it sort of started down, I guess you'd say, the FDR years when those types of things happened. Whether it be Social Security, whether it be transportation under Eisenhower, whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, those types of things. But you're absolutely right. Like that line was more than blurred over the last decade, right? So I agree. I like the way it was before. Honestly, I like the way it was when we had a state legislature that appointed senators, because I think that was much more of a focus on you represent the state, not the state as a sovereign entity, not the people per se. That's always. You read the Federalist Papers. That was their vision of it. Senators were more about representing a state as opposed to like sort of a nationalized election. That changed as well. But to your point, if we were to change that and try to become much more like the 10th Amendment that was envisioned, it would be radical surgery. It really would be. And it does. It has produced the type of things you just mentioned. Like, it's their way of controlling, right.
The Department of Education says, hey, here's a policy. you have to teach it in schools, whether it's whatever agenda or narrative they're trying to put through, through the country.
Yeah.
And if you want the money for your schools, you have to teach this. And now the states are so dependent on that education money or Medicaid money or whatever the case may be. Now they're beholden to the government's, the federal government's ideologies.
That's right.
Well, Mark, I can't thank you much. I really I appreciate it. This is a great conversation.
Always.
I love the unique blend of good information about the state with things that are happening with our Constitution, because I know that you keep up with the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
I've watched where your vacations are. All right, everybody.
That's right.
All right, everybody. If you know Mark Wright, share the video, watch the video, share it with somebody you think might be interested in this information. Thank you all so much.